This one. Okay, Boker Tov, everyone. A good yar. This Tekufa, this time, this period of 10 days, it has a specific moniker. It's got a nickname. We call it the Aseres Yemei Teshuva, the 10 days of Teshuva. And we can define Teshuva in various ways, and we'll think about that in a particular light in a few minutes toward the end of our learning this morning. But if someone were to ask you, what is the theme of these days of the Aseres Yemei, you would tell them, it's Teshuva. Aseres Yemei Teshuva. And that is what the Rambam tells us. If you take a look on your page, source number 1, the Rambam says, Afal Pi, even though Sha'Tshuva V'Hatza'aka Yafa La'olam, even though it's always wonderful, it's always appropriate to have Tshuva, Tza'aka, screaming out to the Ribono Shel Olam. Ba'asara hayomim shebein Rosh Hashanah v'Yom HaKippurim, in these 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Hiyafe biyoser. It is exceptionally wonderful. This is the time of Tshuva. Umiskabelas hi miyad, the Rambam says, and it is immediately received. Shenei Amar, as it says in the pasuk, Dirshu Hashem behi matz'o. Seek out HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Navi says, when he is found. When is he found? We have a tradition. Eilu Asara Yomim. These are the 10 days, Shebein Rosh Hashanah v'Yom HaKippurim. Dirshu Hashem behi matz'o, Aseres Yemei Teshuva. So we all know this. This is obvious. But there's another theme. It's a little less obvious, but I suspect it's also known to us. Another theme of this week. One of the ways, if you want to think about what is the theme of a particular time, is to think about what is being reflected in davening. The Nusach HaTfilah, the character of the day, the Me'in HaMa'ora, is reflected in the davening. So we make several changes in the davening during this week. So one change in the davening appears in the Gemara. That's right. Hakel HaKadosh to HaMelech HaKadosh. And it's important to know that this appears in the Gemara in Brachos because, let's take a step back. Where does davening come from? Who established for us the Nusach of Tefillah and Brachos, the structure of our davening? That's right, the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah. So you're talking about way back, Bayis Sheni. That was the original takana of brachos and tefillos. Then came the Chachmei HaMasor in the times of the Mishnah and the Gemara, and they tweaked and modified and formulated those brachos in a particular way. That's, the Gemara ends around the year 500, let's say. But then a couple of hundred years later, let's say in the 8th century and in the 10th century, that period of time, those 300-400 years, there were what we call Gaonim. Gaonim were the heads of the yeshiva Gaon Yaakov in Bavel. They established other tweaks in davening. Many of our nusach components come from Rav Hai Gaon, the period of the Gaonim. It's interesting, by the way. Today, if somebody is a genius, you call them a Gaon, right? A Gaon is a genius. In the times of the Gaonim, you just had to be the head of the yeshiva Gaon Yaakov. You could be a great fundraiser, and you would be a Gaon. So it's a good mahalach. You can raise money, you're also a Gaon. But here's the point. In the times of the Gaonim, they made other changes to the davening. not just Hakel HaKadosh and HaMelech HaKadosh, which comes up in the Gemara. And that's why if you forget inadvertently to say HaMelech HaKadosh, you have to repeat the whole Shmoneh Esrei, because that change is from the period of the Gemara. That becomes essential to the davening. However, the Gaonim made 4 other changes that we're familiar with. Take a look. Source number 2 says the Mishnah Brura. This is the Mishnah Brura in Siman Tuf Kuf Pei Beis. Mishnah Brura says, Da Gaonim Tiknu Ba'aseris Mei Tshuva. The Gaonim made a takana in Aseris Mei Tshuva. Lomar, to say Zachrenu. We say Zachrenu Beverchas Avos. That's number 1. What do we do next? Bigvuros Michamocha. Third, we say in Hodah, in Modim, at the end of Modim, we say Uchsov. And the 4th change, in Sim Shalom, we say the Sefer Chaim. Okay? So we're familiar with this also. This reflects another theme, a different theme. If you look in the tour, you look at the tour is the 4-volume halachic work that was composed by the son of the Rosh, Rav Yaakov ben Asher. Rav Yaakov ben Asher in the 14th century, he was the one who came up with the idea of dividing halacha into 4 sections: daily living, Orach Chaim, Yoredeya, mitzvos, Even HaEzer, matrimony, Choshen Mishpat, civil commercial. That quad distinction, that came from the 14th century from the Torah, and that was the model for the Shulchan Aruch, who wrote a commentary on the Torah called the Beis Yosef. His name is Rav Yosef Karo. So the Torah is authored by Rav Yaakov ben Asher, the son of the Rosh. Rav Yaakov ben Asher writes in the Torah something that is really amazing. This takana of the Gaonim has deep roots. Says the Torah, if you look here in source number 3, says the Torah, let's see if we can pull it up for the people online. Here we go. Says the Torah, V'tiknu lahosif bevirchas mogein zachrenu l'chaim. They made a takana to recite zachrenu l'chaim in the first bracha in mogein. Ki b'chaim nofel lashon zechira. When you think of the concept of chaim, you associate it with zechira. Why? Why would you think that? Because there's a pasuk in Yechezkel. Obviously, everybody, if that's the first thing that comes to mind, it's the pasuk in Yechezkel. Uvishuv Rasha Mirisho Kol Pshav Asher Asa Lo Yizachru Lo Bitzid Kaso Asher Asa Yichya. So the Beis Yosef here in his commentary tries to figure out, is it from this pasuk that we connect Zechira and Chaim, or is actually the previous pasuk? Because in this pasuk it's kind of a negative context. We're talking about the tshuva of the guy who did something bad. But anyway, here it's Lo Yizachru, the bad things, but the previous pasuk is we'll remember the good things. But Chaim, says the Torah, is associated with Zechira. Uchsiv Zechira be'Avraham. And Avraham is associated with Zechira. So says the Torah, you want to know why the Gaonim instituted that we should have Zachrenu L'chaim in the first bracha in Shmoneh Esrei? It's because Zechira and Chaim go together, and Avraham and Zechira go together, so that's the place to put Chaim. That tells us something. If someone were to ask you, what is the most essential, what is the core bracha of Shmoneh Esrei, of any Shmoneh Esrei, what would you tell them? Avos, exactly. If a person, the Rambam Paskins, it says in Shulchan Aruch, and we try the best we can to fulfill this, strictly speaking, if a person recited Shmoneh Esrei, and maybe they were a little bit fashlufen, I don't know if this happens to anybody, but I can tell you the period of slichas, it's mamish. Woo! I don't know, sometimes my davening Maariv, my davening Shacharis, what time is it? And what? You know what I'm talking about. So we're trying the best that we can here. We're doing the best we can. But you forgot, maybe you kind of dozed off between Borech Aleinu and like Es Semach. You maybe didn't have the best kavanah. It's okay. But strictly speaking, according to the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, if a person didn't have kavanah during Avos, in theory, they would have to repeat the Shemona Esrei. I'm not saying that practically, because L'maisa B'zman said we're not on a level. I'm not on a level that you can always. But what do we learn from that? That Avos is the core. That's the essence of the Shemona Esrei. It's just standing before the Rebbe and saying, my parents were here, my grandparents were here, our great forebearers were here, and you're everything, Rebbe Shalom. So right then, we insert Zachreinu L'chaim. So now we have a second theme. The Aseres Yimei Tshuva, that's one theme. And then you have the Aseres Yimei Chaim, you could call it. We spent a whole week asking for life. Zachreinu L'chaim, Kosveinu L'chaim. At the last second we say, that's right, Chosmeinu L'chaim. So here's my question, what I want to explain. What is the relationship between these two themes? Is it the pshat that, well, the only way we're going to merit Chaim is if we do tshuva? So we are preparing or setting up this with that. You do tshuva, you get Chaim. So we're going to spend a whole 10 days doing tshuva so that we can merit Chaim. That's one way to understand it. But maybe there's a different way to think about this. The relationship between tshuva and Chaim. Let's ask it differently. How do we define Chaim? When we say the word Chaim, when we ask Zachreinu L'chaim, what do we mean? What is the connotation of Chaim? So one answer is physical life. If you ask a biology teacher, they would tell you what the definition of a living organism is. There's a biological definition of Chaim. You ask a transplant surgeon, they'll tell you whether the patient is Chai or the patient is not Chai. Chaim, that's one definition. But then the Gemara has something very different. The Gemara has a discussion. It's a very powerful discussion. It's also a very emotionally charged discussion for many people. The Gemara has a discussion with Seches Brachos about the relationship between us and our world and what's happening in the other world, in the Olam HaEmes. Do the people, do the neshamas, those who are living in the other world, do they know what's happening in this world? What's our relationship with them in that way? So Gemara tells Maisa, the story. Reb Chia and Reb Yonasan. Reb Chia and Reb Yonasan have a shakli va'azli bebeis hakvaros. They were going in the beis hakvaros. They were walking back and forth in the cemetery. Have a kashadya tchilta to Rabbi Yonasan. Rabbi Yonasan, his tcheles, his talis, he was wearing a talis. Remember, in those days, people just wore four-cornered beged, like a poncho. That's what they wrapped themselves, like a shawl. You ever see that? Especially certain people are always cold. They're always wearing the shawls. They have the shawl situation going on. Just saying. So some people, some of those things require tzitzis. So he had tzitzis. Either that or I don't think it's a talis cotton, but like you see, it was shadet chilta. This is like, we think this might be tchelis. This is blue strings. This is from the murex trunculus dye. Maybe this is the real tchelis. If you had very long tzitzis, they would be dragging on the ground. And Reb Chia said to him, Reb Yonasan, Dalye, pick up the tzitzis. Pick up the fringes from the floor. It's dragging. Why? Why do you think he said that to him? Kidei shelo yomu, so that those who are buried in the cemetery, they shouldn't say, big shot. Lamachar, tomorrow, this man, boy, and he's going to come to us. He's not going to live forever. He's going to come to our world. Va'achshav, and now, Mecharfan son, who's mocking us. Because where we are we can't perform the mitzvah of tzitzis. Story from the Vilna Gaon, the great Talmudic, halachic, spiritual giant and genius. When he was on his deathbed, the last few moments, he looked at his Talmidim and he was crying. So the Talmidim said to him, Rebbe, why are you crying? And he said, in this world, right now, for a few rubles, I can fulfill a mitzvah of tzitzis just even lying here wearing tzitzis. And where I'm going, there are no more mitzvahs. So Reb Chia said to Rabbi Yonasan, pick up your tzitzis. We call this in halacha, loeg larosh, mocking a poor person. This is a din in Shulchan Aruch. It's a din halacha l'maisa. So says Rabbi Yonasan to Reb Chia, really? What do you mean? Amar le umi yadi kuli hai. Do those people in that world, do they know what's going on over here? What do they know? I'm walking in a cemetery with tzitzis. They're in the other world. What do they know? And Reb Chia rips him. He goes after him very sharp. He said to him, if you think you learned, you know how to learn? Im karisa, lo shanisa. You didn't learn anything. Because Rabbi Yonasan quotes a pasuk to him, Va'amesim einim yodim ba'uma. The deceased don't know anything. Rabbi Chia says, you don't know anything. Im shanisa lo shilashtem, shilashta lo pirshaloch. They didn't explain anything. That's not what that pasuk means. It doesn't mean that they in that world don't know what's going on in this world. It means something else. Hamesim einim yodim ba'uma. The Gemara explains there are two kinds of people. There are tzaddikim, and then there are what the Gemara calls Rishayim. Tzaddikim, the Gemara says, Hachayim yodim sheyamusu elu tzaddikim shebemisasa nikru chayim. But the Mesim einim yodim u'uma, these are the Rishayim shebechayim kriyim Mesim. It's not that the people in the other world don't know what's happening in this world. They know very well. It's just what it means is, it means the people who are deceased don't know anything. It means the people who are in this world who are deceased, they're Mason. But there could be people in the other world who are Chaim, and they know exactly. We have a name for the Yom HaKadosh. It's called Yom HaKippurim in Halacha. Yom HaKippurim. It's not, legally, it's not called Yom Kippur. Why is it called Yom HaKippurim? Okay, it's a remes to Purim, yes. Why else? Because the Achronim point out, it's a double kapara. It's a kapara l'chaim v'lemesim. Wait a second. You're telling me that a person is judged when they leave this world, and you're telling me that they're judged again in the next year and again in the next year, but we just explained that lamesim chafshi, they don't have mitzvahs. So how can the neshama be judged if they didn't live in this world? So Rav Shefter used to explain this. I heard this from him multiple times. He said, you know how they're judged? Because of their influence. So people, especially from Kippur, they say Yizkar, and they remember the people in their lives who influenced them, who inspired them, set them on a certain path. I don't know why, but usually in Sana Tokef, for some reason, I just invariably I end up thinking about my grandparents who are in the other world. Well, they're going to get judged every year. They made a choice. They chose to send my parents to day school to give them a Torah education. And my parents there, in turn, chose to send me to a Torah education and the path of teaching Torah. So when they call up my grandparents this year, Haba Aleinu L'Tova, for the din, they're going to say, oh, you know, there are people who got together in Skokie, Illinois, who learned Torah because of you. It's the new din. It's Yom HaKippurim. It's kapara for the Chaim and for the Mason. All the influence that they did, it comes back year after year as it grows. Think about all those people in our lives who we think of, who are that in that category of Kippurim, what they did and how that legacy lives on, how it's mashpia on the world year after year. even if they're not in this world, because they're still Chaim. So the definition, according to the Gemara now, of Chaim is not biological. When we say Chaim, we don't mean whether the person is breathing or is alive in a molecular sense. It means something else. So what does it mean exactly? So there's an amazing formulation by a guy who you would not necessarily think is the best go-to guy to define Chaim from this Gemara, but he's definitely a great author. His name is Tolstoy, Leo Tolstoy. So now you should know, Leo Tolstoy was, of course, one of the greatest literary geniuses of all time, but he also was, lahavdil, if you could say such a thing, a tremendous Baal Tshuva. Later in life, Tolstoy underwent a tremendous transformation. He became a very devout Christian. He became very involved in religious life and focused on spirituality. Very interesting. He became a huge activist in this, like a religious sense. So it's not our kind of Baal Tshuva, but he became very spiritually attuned. So he wrote a book called A Confession. And it's the story of his transformation through tshuva, lahavdil, from where he was, the Christian transformation. But what he describes really captures what the Gemara seems to be telling us about the definition of Chaim. Tolstoy describes that part of what led him to this transformation was a very disturbed and unsettled life. That at times he found himself very high, and then at times himself very, very emotionally, very low. Ad kedei kach low. Later he describes there were times he wanted to end his own life. He was so low. So as he was working this out, he was thinking and exploring and realizing. And he says in chapter 12, but then I turned my gaze upon myself, on what went on within me. And I remembered all those cessations of life and reanimations that reoccurred within me hundreds of times. I remembered that I only lived at those times when I believed in God. As it was before, so it was now. I need only be aware of God to live. I need only forget him or disbelieve him, and I die. What is the animation and dying? I do not live when I lose belief in the existence of God. I should long ago have killed myself had I not had a dim hope of finding him. I live, really live, only when I feel him and seek him. What more do you seek? Exclaimed a voice within me. This is he. He is that without which one cannot live. To know God and to live is one and the same thing. God is life. This is Chaim. Chaim means to be connected to the Ribbono Shel Olam, to be connected to something meaningful, transcendent, deep, and spiritual. That's what the Gemara meant. A person can be in this world or in the next world. It doesn't matter where that person is. They can either be Chaim or not Chaim. A person could be not Chaim in this world. They could be the walking dead. You know, there was a great Hasidic master, the Heilige Kotzker Rebbe. The Kotzker, Rebbe Menachem Mendel Morgenstern, Kotzker was so sharp. He was so sharp. So the Chassidim, they used to ask him questions. He would give them very sharp responses. So he once said to the Chassidim, he said, I have such spiritual powers that I could go to the cemetery and revive the souls that have died. He says, but I'd rather spend my time reviving the souls that are in this room living. Because the definition of Chaim, of course, on one level, it means a physical life. When we ask the Ribbono Shel Olam, Zachreinu l'chaim, we're asking him to give us physical, corporeal, earthly life. For Chaim Tovim, for brios, health, for nachas, emotional, physical. Yes, we're asking for all of that, but that's not the deep meaning of the word chayim. Chayim means a connection with the Ribono Shel Olam. What happens to Yaakov Avinu when Yosef is taken away from him? Somehow his connection with the Ribono Shel Olam is strained, whatever that means at his level. When Yosef comes back, so Rashi says, he was uplifted, and now he has Ruach HaKodesh again. What does the pasuk say? Vatechi Ruach Yaakov Avinu. Because now he has Chiyus. Now he has Chaim. For that time when Yosef was gone, he didn't really have Chaim. Chaim is that connection with the Ribono Shel Olam. Rav Kook takes this idea to the next level and brings it even on a more practical understanding. When Rav Kook was younger, he wrote a commentary on several Masechtos and Shas, on Brachos, on Shabbos, and we have this commentary. It's called Ein Ayah, Ein from the word Ayin, like the vision of Ayah, Aleph, Yod Hey is Avram Yitzchak HaKohen. So this is Rav Kook's commentary. It's Ein Ayah. So take a look. It's here. It's on the bottom in number 4. V'hamesim einam yodem u'uma. Rav Kook says, let me explain to this Gemara. Eilu Rishayim, these are the Rishayim shebachayim kriyim mesim, that in their lifetime, in this world, they are called mesim. Why? Because ikar hachayim, the main thing of life, afilu b'chay hazman, even living in this temporary world, hurak, it is only otzim hargoshas hakochos hanafshim, v'hod hachayim. It is the intense feeling of the strength of the soul and the glory of life. What does that mean, Lamais? Says Rav Kook, I'll tell you. Ki the Rishayim, sheishpilu kochoseim hanafshim, that diminished, that lowered the strength of their nefesh, el chukos hachomrius, to the pursuit of materialism. Ein kochoseim haruchanim yotzim min hakoach alapoal. Their expression of inner spiritual strength is not manifest. Everyone, even Rishayim, have an inner spiritual core, but it doesn't come out. Why? Because they're so focused on inyonim, on shukos chomrios, on the physical. Al kain lo yuchlu, top of the second column, klal. It's impossible for them lahargish kol kach, to really fully feel hod hachayim v'tifartam, the beauty, the glory, the majesty of life. To the extent that kahat tzadikim, that the righteous shebilvavam, that in their hearts moshelas nafshem elyona, their more noble, elevated spiritual dimension is the ruler. The kochzeh hanuchonim mispashtim b'archava gedola, and the tzadikim, their spiritual quality, it flows, it transcends boundaries, it expands. Why, says Rav Kook? I'll tell you. What does it mean that tzaddikim in this world are chayim and rishayim are not? He says it's because that tzaddikim in this world enjoy life more. Why? Because ki argoshas onek hasimcha, third line, second column, the feeling, the true feeling of profound contentment of joy is ba'asos tov, to do something good, unedivus, and generosity, v'hasagas chachma, and accomplishing in wisdom, v'tzedek, and doing the right thing, for somebody who is inclined for this. They're much deeper. They're felt more profoundly in a person's soul than the enjoyment of the physical, of the guf. The guf is very delicious, very wonderful, and we enjoy it a lot. And the Rebbe Shalom gave it to us for that reason. It's part of our avoda in life, is to also enjoy the world that He gave us. Baruch Hashem, now live in Chicago, so there are many tanugim chomriyim. And I'm not talking about the 8 per pound hot dogs. I'm talking about the 4 per pound. You know, like the knockwurst. So you have in the summertime, you're outside, It's beautiful weather. The Rosh Hashanah is shining, the sun down. You're grilling. You have the 4 per pound knockwurst. I don't know why. There's a minhag locally. Some people, they put ketchup on the hot dog. I'm not sure why that is. Not sure. I've seen people do that. I don't understand it. It's a New York thing. I don't know what it is. I don't know who does that. I've seen some people do that. But you take that, you put it on a fresh bun with grilled onions and some mustard, and it's mamish gewalt, geschmack. It's very geschmack. It's a machaya. But, says Rav Kook, as much as that's geschmack and a machaya, is that as geschmack as reaching out to somebody who you see maybe is a little bit alone and you give them some chizuk? Is that as geschmack as a few moments of learning when you just have that tranquility and that feeling of connection? Is it as good as doing a tova for somebody who needs a hand? As doing a chesed shel emes? Those feel a lot deeper, a lot more geschmack than even the most geschmack Romanian. That's what it means to have chayim. Why? Because you are connecting, tapping in to something that's nitzchi, that's life, that's chayim, it's connection to the Rebbeinu Shalom. So Rav Kook explains. He says it's because, look at the next line, because shekoach haguf hu mugdar umugbal. Anything which is physical, it has a limit, even on a practical level. How many hot dogs can you eat? How many? Shuchai rak per mikre. But not the same for chayim, for nitzchim, for ruchnius. When you tap into ruchnius, when you have that ruchniistic experience, you're tapping into something that transcends this world. It's chai olamim. It's eternal. So it feels much deeper, much more meaningful. That's right. So now we understand, what does it mean, v'chai b'hem? V'chai b'hem does not just mean that we should just be in this spatial existence of life, existing on a biological level. V'charta v'chayim, v'chai b'hem, chayim means living a spiritual life, living a life that has ruchnius, that is tapped into something deeper. And in that sense, a person who's living with the Rebbeinu Shalom, that could be in that next world, and it could be in this world. And that sense, we get that when we tap into it in this world also. So now, in this light, we can re-examine the 2 themes that we started. Maybe we can understand that it's not that tshuva enables, facilitates, or merits chayim. Maybe there's actually an inner connection. And this is explained beautifully in a small passage in a book called The Secret Life of God. Rabbi David Aaron, who lives in Yerushalayim, he teaches in an institute called Israelite. It's a really interesting guy. He teaches Kabbalah, Rav Kook, Machshava. So he wrote this book. It's a great, terrific book, great book, like a little small volume. It's like, imagine if you were in an airport in the time of Mashiach and all the books in the airport were all Jewish Torah books. They would have that shelf with like the skinny small ones that you can read in an hour when you're trying to get to LaGuardia and mamish, it's not happening. So this would be that book. So it's super kedai. It's a short book. So if you turn over, if you have the Marmakolos, I'll read it out. It's called The Secret Life of God. So he's talking about tshuva. And he talks about how tshuva is not just relevant to individual people, it's part of the whole mahalach of the universe, of the creation. And he says in the bottom left of the page, on page 22, he says very powerfully, tshuva is actually the theme of life. We are always in the midst of tshuva. Life is an endless journey, an adventure in becoming. It's all about improving, building, and accomplishing. That's what we love doing. It doesn't always seem so wonderful, but if it did, there would be no growth. We would miss the opportunity to make mistakes, grow from them, celebrate the triumph, and experience the sweetness of forgiveness. God put you in this world which is one great obstacle course, but also joins you in the challenge. God is like a great coach who's training you for the Olympics. He sets up a training ground filled with obstacles. That is his gift to you. He is really creating opportunities for you to jump higher. He also knows the higher you need to jump, the harder you could fall. But that's the price you pay to enter the Olympics. You are bound to make mistakes and fail sometimes, but when you do, don't despair. It's all part of the process. Just try again and keep moving forward. Don't spend your valuable time beating yourself up over the past, constantly bemoaning all the mistakes you made. Jewish traditions reminds us that the great people make mistakes. Skip the next paragraph. This is part of our service to God, the aspect of absolute divine perfection that we express. However, we need to remember the profound mystery that God is not only our coach urging us to greater achievements, but also the source of the runner, the soul within us. And he has a vested interest in the outcome of the race. Meaning, when we go through life, we have ups and downs. We have starts and fits and steps forward and step backwards. That's all part of a growth process. It's the process of what Rav Kook was talking about, of prioritizing our ruchnius over our gashmius, the meaning over the instant gratification, the profound over the fleeting. And it's a back and forth. But that engagement with that process, that is Chaim, that is Teshuva. Teshuva is actually the theme of life. If life is about living with the Ribbono Shel Olam, it's having that awareness that Hashem is with us as our coach, as our source of life. And as we go through these challenges and opportunities to rebuild, and challenges and opportunities to rebuild. Isn't that what Teshuva is? Isn't that what Chaim is? So now, it's not that Teshuva is a prerequisite for Chaim. Perhaps in this light, Teshuva and Chaim are synonymous. Chaim is about living with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Teshuva is about living with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Teshuva is about going through that real life, constant struggle for growth with Hashem. And Chaim is the value of prioritizing and being aware that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us on that journey. It is a process. And being aware, yes, that's true. That's true also. The more tshuva, the more growth we have, we improve our Chaim. But it's not just that we improve Chaim in a qualitative way, as Rav Kook is talking about also. There is a quality of Chaim that we appreciate of being connected to transcendence. But now perhaps we can understand a deeper meaning of when we say Zachreinu L'chaim during Aseret Yemei Teshuva. During Aseret Yemei Teshuva, we're returning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is Chaim. That's ultimate Chaim. That's prioritizing HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's tapping into Nitzchias. That's what we do during Aseret Yemei Teshuva. That's both themes together. So when we say now, Zachreinu L'chaim, what are we asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for? We're asking for a life that we can continue this process of Teshuva, that we can continue to be close to Him, that we can continue to feel close to Him. Because He wants us to have Chaim, right? It's all about Chaim. What is Chaim? It's not about another hot dog. It's not about another physical day. It's about a life with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And He wants us to have that. He wants us to have that growth, that Teshuva, that Chaim of Ruchnius. You're the Chavetz B'Chaim. So we say, Zachreinu L'chaim. Please, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, give us a year. What kind of year are we asking for? So we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for Shnas Chaim. So on one level, we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and I bless all of us, that we should all, and all of our families, and our community, and all of Klal Yisrael, we should merit a Chaim al pi pshuto in this world. We should merit the good health, and the nachas, and the simchas, and the shalvas and nefesh. We should merit all of that. Amen for all of us. But what we're really on a deeper level asking for is that we should have a life of chaim, of tshuva, of meaning. That when we go through life, it shouldn't just be a fleeting one of what Rav Kook described as the chukos, the taivos chomrios. It shouldn't just be trying to live from one meal to the next. It should be a life that we feel has fulfillment of nitzchias, that we're able to accomplish in the role of ruchnias, in reaching out to others and making them feel like there's something, and then we feel like we're somebody. In doing those chasadim, in raising a community, in influencing others that makes us feel like we're mamish chai, we're contributing, we're alive, we're part of something that's greater than ourselves that we call Ribono Shel Olam. That we should have a year where our davening feels like it's chai, that it's alive. That we should have a year of learning where we feel chai, where we should ultimately feel chayim, a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Exactly what Tolstoy said, that we should have a year that we feel that we are connected, that we have the opportunity to know God and to live with God. Isn't that the ultimate expression of tshuva? Isn't that what we're all really praying for ourselves, for our families, for Klal Yisrael, and for the whole world? May it be the will of the Ribono Shel Olam that we should all merit this year, on both of those levels, a Shana of Chaim. Thank